Hey, welcome back to the Coffee with Creators podcast. My name is Rob Balasabas. I'm the host of the podcast. Really glad to have you here. Today, we have a conversation with Liz Mosley, who's a good friend of mine, a good online friend of mine. We actually connected a couple years ago at Adobe Max in LA. She's an Adobe ambassador as well. She's a graphic designer by trade looks like over 15 years now. And she really works with small business owners on creative and branding. And she also has a podcast called Building Your Brand, and she also has courses, and so really awesome conversation, just how she built her business. A really small team, but really successful, really productive, and just how intentional she has built her business. I'm really excited for you guys to listen to this, because I actually learned some things here from Liz and how she has built her business so intentionally without all the extra things that will distract her. And I think it's a really good lesson for some of us here, including myself, in how to be intentional with building your business. And so I'm really excited for you to meet her. Again, Liz Mosley on the Coffee with Creators podcast. Here we go. Liz, welcome to the podcast. So glad to have you here. How are you doing today?
Yeah, good. Thanks so much for having me.
Very good, very good. All right, well, I'm really excited to finally have a conversation with you. I know we were, I think, both at Adobe Max in Los Angeles.
Two
Correct me
years
if I'm
ago.
wrong. Yeah, a couple
Yeah.
years ago, and time has just flown since, and we finally are able to do some podcast collabs here. So, but before we dive in, Liz, I always just kind of like to ask, guests before we get started, quick little icebreaker. And today, I'm actually really curious. It seems like you really know what you're doing, but as a kid, what were you hoping to be? What did you want to be, when you grew up? When you were, in elementary, right? Elementary school, Liz, what were you, aspiring to be, or thought you would want to be?
Well, interestingly, I thought I wanted to be a photographer. And for the
Oh,
longest time, I had my sights set on being a photographer. And when I was at school, they had a dark room in the art department. That this is like ages me slightly. So I spent hours and hours in this. It was effectively a cupboard. It was just like a cupboard in the art department. I spent hours in there developing photos. So yeah, a photographer. And then I think before that, like I used to carry a sketchbook with me everywhere and I would draw all sorts. So I think when I was really little, just artist in general, something I always knew that I wanted to do something creative, but it took me a long time before I worked out the graphic design was the thing for me.
wow. So yeah, I mean, you kind of followed that dream then, basically. I mean,
I
you
know.
literally did. I mean, I'm gonna show my I'm gonna show my screen here, but this is your website homepage, and you're literally drawing on your website
Yeah.
homepage. So, wow. That's
I
such a
I think what happened was I discovered graphic design and realized that I could combine everything that I loved within that one sort of
that's
discipline.
beautiful.
So like, like illustration, photography, typography, bring it all together. So yeah, it's worked out very nicely.
It's worked out exactly as planned. Yeah, that's great. That's beautiful. And so when did it become? I mean, did this continue on through high school and then like college? Is that sort of the educational path post secondary that you took? Or
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think I took a pretty traditional traditional route really. So in the UK, they have what's called an art foundation course, and it's
Mm.
basically in between what's is elementary school high. I think it's what we'd call high school.
Elementary
Is that
school is
right?
like kindergarten to grade 7, and then we have high school, which is
Uh
8 to 12, and then
okay.
you go to college.
I should I should clarify that I was not in a dark room when I was in elementary
I
school.
was
I
gonna
got the
say,
wrong one.
I didn't even argue it. I'm like, maybe that's what they do in the UK. They're so advanced.
No. Okay, so that was what we would call high school. So that is sort of like age 11 to sort of 18.
18, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was when I was doing the photography thing. And after that, I went and did a year's course called an art foundation. And it honestly, it
Mm.
was one of the best, educationally, it was the best year of my life. It was just basically a year where you could try all different creative disciplines, and it was quite low pressure. Like you did get assessed, and you did have sort of like a final show at the end, but the whole point was like you knew you wanted to do something creative, but you didn't know exactly what route you wanted to go down. And this was kind of like a low risk year where you could just try all different things. So like ceramics, photography, design, fashion, all sorts. And yeah, I mean, that was where I discovered my love of graphic design, basically, because it wasn't something that I'd studied at school. And I don't even remember being that aware of it as sort of like a profession or a job. Um, and then I had an amazing graphic design tutor on this art foundation course. And just, yeah, as I mentioned before, just realized that I could combine all of the things that I loved almost together in this one discipline, even if it wasn't always me doing everything, just getting to work with photographers and illustrators and that kind of thing. And then after that, I went and did a 3-year degree in graphic design. So pretty traditional route. And then I did an internship after that, and then I went and got a job in a little agency in London, and I've been working as a designer ever since. But now, more recently, the last 6 years, self-employed, working for myself.
Yeah, and you're doing great. I mean, we were just chatting. You're at Adobe Max in London, and doing your thing there. I mean, that must be such a for me, it must have been such a surreal moment almost. Like, kind of like, wow, it's like I've arrived. I mean, you probably have had that feeling, earlier, but, it must be so cool just to be there, using the tools, Adobe, and then all of a sudden you're there, as part of, not just attending, but like part of the whole production.
Yeah, it's been amazing, actually. I think that's it. Like, I've been literally using Adobe tools since, well, pre going to university, like while I was at
Right.
school, my dad introduced me to them. And they have this funny thing at the moment at events where they have these, and I think they had them when we were at Max as well
Yeah.
in LA, where they have these pins, and you
Yeah.
can basically work out how long you've been using Adobe
Yeah.
products and then select a pin. And it's so funny, like watching everybody sort of like having to sort of scratch their head and work out how long they've been using them for. But I think mine was like 20 years, which I
Oh
was
my
like, wow,
goodness.
that's a long time. But yeah, it's just amazing to be there. And one of the things, I guess, when I got involved with Adobe, that I didn't really consider is just how amazing the community aspect's been. So like I've
Mm.
literally met creators from all over the world. They've become really good friends. Like I feel like I'm part of this really supportive community, which I guess I didn't expect, because Adobe is such a huge company. Like it's
Right.
very impressive how they do it, because there is a real community feel, even though they're like this huge global company. So yeah, that has been an amazing experience, and it is very much like a pinch me moment of, I can't believe I'm here and doing things with them, not just attending.
Yeah, no, that's so cool. That is so true. The Adobe, you would think you would get lost, but they have such an awesome community, like communities, I guess. Like they have multiple communities, and I know that we will both work with different partnership folks in there, and they just make it feel very like, is this a startup or is this like this big conglomerate,
Yeah.
you know, thing. So such an awesome feeling. No, going back to your your early days. I mean, that is just so cool to see. Like, I know that we have a couple kids, and they like to draw and Procreate, and they like to, and it's just like, I wonder where this will go for them. Like I know, I've had a lot of friends. I used to do it all doodling when I was like in grade school as well, but it never, I mean, to some degree, I guess, but I am using those skills. But you just kind of look at some of the, I'm like, I wonder where this is gonna go. My our oldest is 14, Liz, and he wants to get into animation. He wants to move to LA when he
Oh,
grows up, because
nice.
when we were there, we took some tours of like Fox Studios, and you got to see where The Simpsons was made and stuff like that. So I it's just really inspiring to see that you took that joy that you had for art and have made a whole career out of it.
Yeah, yeah. And similarly to you, I've got 2 kids. And yeah, I mean, it's just so much fun watching them be creative. And I guess, yeah, thinking back, seeing them drawing and making things, and it really reminds me of what I was like when I was a kid. And it's just, yeah, it's interesting to sort of think, what might that turn into down the line?
Yeah. No, that's so good. That's so good. For me, really quickly, when I was a kid, everybody, I don't know if I've shared, but I actually wanted to be a suit. I wanted to be, which is like the furthest from the truth now as I've grown up. I wanted to be one of those, like a stockbroker, like in finance. And
Mhm.
I took 1 year, Liz, in college. First year, I went into finance, and I changed over to marketing like first summer after college. I was like, no, this is not
Nice.
for me. I started to see like, balance sheets and all this stuff. And I'm like, no, this cannot be my world. So, yeah, so that's me. And I went into marketing, ever
And now you're
since.
like really creative, doing all
Yeah.
sorts of different stuff. That's so cool.
Yeah. So yeah, well, I'm really glad that you're here. I really want to talk about, you have, again, you have this background in art and design, and you are now really just, I mean, you've got all sorts of, offerings, and you're doing coaching, you've got courses, you're consulting. Tell us a little bit about your business. That's kind of what we talk about here on the podcast. That's really, we get into the nitty gritty of like, how have you built your business and what does that look like? Because we do have a lot of folks that are creative or creators listening, and they're just trying to figure out, how to either launch or grow a business around their passion. So yeah, give us a little bit of like behind the scenes on what your business looks like.
Okay, well, I feel like I had quite a gentle ease into the sort of self-employed life. So basically, I was working in-house at university, and I started getting people asking me to do jobs for them on the side. So freelance projects. And I started to do some of those, got a bit of a taste for it. But I think the sort of real pivotal point of where I started to build my own business was probably after I had kids, and I realized that I didn't want to go back to my 9 to 5 job. Like hilariously, I didn't ever, well, when I was leaving university and stuff, I didn't really have aspirations to run my own business. A lot of my friends, dreamt of like having an agency and or being a freelancer, and that was never really my goal. But once I had kids, I didn't want to go back to my 9 to 5, so I started, I guess, taking my business more seriously. And so at this point, I had started a stationery business, which I was kind of just doing for fun. And I would describe as kind of like a hobby business. So I was like going to, craft fairs and markets around London. And then I was also doing freelance work for clients on the side. And I kind of got to the point where I realized that I just needed to pick one of them and go all in. So I picked the sort of services side of my business, branding, design. And it was just before the pandemic that I sort of had made that decision that I was just going to focus on that aspect of my business. And I think, yeah, I mean, I actually, interestingly, I did a marketing course around that time and just sort of fell in love with the online business world and marketing, and just had such an appetite to learn all of these different things. And so I started promoting my services as a branding designer. I was very much focused on small businesses because I'd really fallen in love with that community when I was doing like the markets and the craft fairs, and I was like selling products. And then over the sort of last few years, my business has kind of developed a few different strands, partly because I do like to do lots of different things. You can probably relate to that. I think a lot of people can relate to this. I find it
Yes.
hard to pick just one thing to do. But I think it all sits, and this I sort of realized quite recently, it all sits very nicely under this kind of umbrella of supporting small businesses with their branding and marketing. So I've got the services side of my business, which is like, I do the branding for you. I've got my podcast, which is called Building Your Brand, and that's all about branding and marketing to help small businesses. And then I do work with Adobe. Like a big part of that is being an Adobe Express ambassador. And that is the tool that is perfect for small business owners who are having to DIY a lot of aspects of their business, or, can't outsource all their marketing or all their design to someone. So they need tools that they can use to make their life easier and quicker. And so actually that sort of fits perfectly under that umbrella. But then I have also done lots of other work with Adobe as well. So speaking and hosting workshops and doing demos and creating content. but yeah, I think it's all quite different stuff, but it all fits under that umbrella, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I really like your, I guess, like the stack of your services and offerings. If you guys are watching the video version of this podcast, I'm just sharing my screen here. This is Liz's website. I like it. It's super, it's really simple. Liz, like I get to talk to a lot of creators. I'm sure you do too. And some of them will like kind of boast about, I've got 28 different revenue streams, and I'm like, I don't know how do you keep up with all of that? I guess,
Yeah.
some folks have teams. And they're no longer really like a one person or like a small team, but they have like this massive team and handles all sorts of revenue streams. But for you, I really love that the fact that you kind of, it sounds like who you're serving really well. Like small businesses has come up in the last few minutes like multiple times. Is that the avatar of who you are helping? It's like this. Is it like a physical small business? Is it like a one-person consultant or coach? Like, what does that look like?
It's interesting because I think, so I use the term small business as that is probably how my target audience would describe themselves. But technically, it would be a micro business, because small businesses is actually like can go up to quite large, what we would consider large businesses. I think it's a tricky one because it's like, realistically, I'm working with micro businesses, so it tends to be one person businesses. Maybe they have like a VA or they have some support. Maybe they have a small team, but it tends not to be much bigger than kind of like 5 people. Yeah, so that they are the people that I enjoy working with, partly because that is what my business is like. So it's, if people come to work with me, they're going to work with me. I do have 2 people that sort of support me. So I've got like a podcast editor, and then I've got someone that does some like she helps me with all different things. I guess you'd call her like a VA or something like that. She helps me with all different things in my business. But ultimately, if you email my business, I'm the person that's going to reply, and I'm the person that you're going to work with. And so I think I just really relate to I guess I understand the struggles of those sort of businesses, and I really relate to that. And I actually really enjoy working with those sorts of clients. They don't always have the biggest budgets, and so that is something that I've had to sort of consider as I've built my business. And I guess that's where what you described comes in. I have sort of started to more intentionally create different revenue streams so that I can keep working with the clients that I enjoy working with. So obviously, one aspect of that is working with Adobe and creating sponsored content and creating social media content for other businesses. Another aspect of that, and this is something that I forgot to mention when I was describing my business, but I have created a few online courses. So, finding other ways to support the target audience, but in a sort of slightly different model that's less kind of like, one-to-one. Like I do it for you.
You do it for them. Yeah, which is great.
Yeah.
I think that's, it's I really love what you said earlier, that small business, that term. It's not maybe what you call them. You would actually probably call them micro businesses, but they call themselves small businesses, or they consider themselves small business. So you kind of like you want to identify them the way that they see themselves, right? So that that when you're speaking to them, when you're putting out your content, and of course, because you're a branding expert, you would know this, is that you don't want to call somebody something that they don't really identify with, so that like they're not attracted to you, right? They're like, well, what's a micro business? I'm not a micro business. Like, what are you talking about? Right. So I think that's really brilliant. I think a lot of people should, a lot of people, even myself, like sometimes we're like, in my space, Liz is like head of creator partnerships here at Uscreen. Sometimes I'll say like, hey Rob, what do you do? Like, hey, like I work with influencers. Like, oh, influencers. Like, I'm not an influencer. Why are we talking? No, they won't say that. But to them, they're like, well, I'm not really an influencer. I'm a content creator, or I'm a YouTube creator, or I'm actually a CEO. Like, like in that space, like, when you think of an influencer, sometimes they don't actually like to be called that, right? And so
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
got some negative connotations now,
Yeah.
hasn't it? And I think like one of the beautiful things about working for yourself is that like I was actually listening to a podcast about this the other day. Like you can ultimately decide what you want to be called. You know, like I can decide to call myself a freelancer, or I could decide to call myself, you know, the CEO of my business. You know,
Yeah.
it's kind of up to me. And so that, I guess, on one hand makes it tricky because then it's,
Hmm.
you know, everyone could be calling themselves something different. But also I think that's it, it's just talking to people, isn't it, and finding out how they identify themselves and then trying to find the language and the terms that will most identify to them. And also one of the things that I talk about a lot, like when I sort of got my branding hat on, is how you want to, like, you actually don't want to attract everybody. Like you want to attract some people, you know, like your
Hmm.
dream clients, but you want to put off other people. And actually you can use language again, you know, to do that. You know, like who, like I, for example, don't really work with corporate clients, and so I tend not to use corporate language because I don't want them to necessarily think that I'm for them.
Yeah.
And so I think there's, you know, like there's certain things that you can do to yeah, to sort of like resonate with those people that you're trying to attract.
To attract. Yeah, you don't want to put out the wrong thing and then catch the wrong thing that you're not looking for. Yeah, that makes a lot
Yeah.
of sense. That's so that's so smart. Yeah. The I'm curious. I have some questions. I'd love to talk about how you have set up sort of like, you know, the learn stuff. You know, like your page says learn stuff, which is really like sort of this one to many. The way that I've always kind of seen it is like, you know, the coaching is one to one, and then of course, like at some point you're gonna run out of space on your, you know, in your calendar, right? You're going to run out of hours,
Mm-hmm.
or you're going to run out of like 30-minute consulting blocks on your Calendly.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious, like how did you decide to launch or start teaching sort of on demand, or, you know, courses? Was that sort of a result of like, okay, I am running out of time, like I won't, you know, I can't grow my business beyond this unless I charge more, or, you know, per hour? What does that look like? How did that decision come about to start teaching online?
I think a lot of these things in my business happen to me a bit accidentally, and then I bring in the strategy afterwards. So what happened was a friend of mine who hosts the creative mornings in our, like in my city, she, during the pandemic, they started doing these things called creative field trips, if people aren't familiar with creative mornings. And obviously before the pandemic, these were like physical trips that people would go in, you know, they'd go and visit someone's studio, or they'd go and, you know, like go on this creative field trip. But in the pandemic they decided to sort of start doing them online. And so people could apply to effectively host kind of like a workshop. You know, it could be on a different theme. Anyway, I had had some success with making my own animated gifs, and you know, they were up on Instagram, people could use them, and I think they'd got to like 2 billion downloads or
Oh
something. So
wow.
it was like a really high number. And so my friend was like, would you do a creative field trip? So a virtual creative field trip where you teach people how to make GIFs. And I had not done any teaching online at this point. So this must have been in 2020. With which is wild to me because now I've done so much of it. But yeah, so I basically did this workshop for Creative Mornings, and over 300 people from all over the world turned up. It was so fun. You know, like people really engaged with it, they loved it. Um, I had like people from all over the world sort of making comments about my accent and where I was from, and it was like there was just like a really nice sort of community feel. I think similar to like what we've talked about with Adobe. You know, like Creative Mornings has a really amazing community as well. Anyway, so that
That's
went really
awesome.
well. And I was telling my friend about it who is in marketing. And I said, oh, I just taught a workshop to over 300 people about how to make GIFs. And she was like, Liz, you need to turn that into a course immediately.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of like my first foray into making a course. So one of the things that I've learned about myself since working for myself is that I have to have a deadline. And so I basically
Mm.
announced the launch date, and then like had a stressful few weeks where I basically forced myself to get it done. Anyway,
That's
so I
awesome.
created this that was like my first course, and I sort of sold that. One of the things that I do need to work more on is I'm not very good at promoting my courses, so they're kind of there ticking in the background. But then what happened next, once I'd done that, it was actually such a helpful process because I just learned what went into actually constructing a course, like all the tech that I needed. I had to learn all these sort of new skills, like how was I going to edit my videos, where was I going to host them, how was I going to get people signed up, like put in, onto the right segment in my mailing list, all these different things that I hadn't really had to consider before. And then what happened was I was getting a lot of people get in touch about me doing branding for them, but as I'd been working for a while, like my prices had gone up, and I was like, it was out of their budget basically. And so I started to think about how actually in my sort of target audience, a lot of the small businesses, when they're first starting out, just don't have the money to invest in branding. And actually, sometimes it's not the right time to invest in branding, because I do think for a lot of businesses, you almost need to go for a couple of years just to work out exactly what it is that you want to do. I think like I've definitely experienced this, like as you run your business, there's lots of sort of twists and turns and slight pivots, and you realize, I thought this was what I wanted to do, but actually, this is what I want to do. And I think sometimes you almost need to like work that stuff out before you really invest in working with someone.
Right.
So I then decided to create a course, which was the one that you can see there on the screen. So Design Your Own Branding, which was basically me guiding people through how they could create their own branding if they didn't have the budget. And this wasn't meant to be like, this is going to be your branding for the rest of your like career, but it was more like, look, this branding, you can create it yourself, and this is going to sort of tide you over for those sort of initial years, or also if you're like creative and you didn't want to sort of like release creative control to someone else, like had quite a vision, this sort of just guided you through the process of doing it yourself. And so then that's kind of how I got started. So this was like a much bigger course than the sort of little gift course that I did. And this was, like I work alongside you. So that this is not, people always talk about passive income. This was not passive. Like I was involved, but it was one to many. So it was a different model. And once I'd created the course, I've done sort of 4 rounds of it now, and in September I'll launch my 5th round. So like it definitely, the investment I put in at the beginning sort of has definitely paid off over time. But yeah, it's worked out really well, and I've had really good feedback about it, like from like the students. Some of them have created amazing branding. Like you can really see their sort of confidence grow as they start using it. And I think that was always my goal. Whether I'm doing your branding or you're doing it yourself, like the goal is that you feel really proud of your business, and then you feel more confident to promote it. So that's how I got into it. And I've got lots of ideas for other courses, which I haven't made yet, because, it is always a juggle. When you are a one-person business, or you've got like a really small team, it is always a juggle to get all of the things done. I'm definitely like an ideas person.
I bet. It's just it's not a problem of lack of ideas. This is really awesome, Liz. I love the branding, of course. It looks so, it's like no brainer, this is so good. It's really well thought out, like you can see here what's being offered. If you guys are just watching or listening to the audio version, apologies. We're looking at Liz's website here. And so I'm sure there's a way for you guys. You can find the video version. You can see everything, and also links to Liz's site so you can check it out yourself directly. Even down to like, what's the time commitment, man? That is such a common question that people don't ask, but they are wondering, right? I always feel that way. It's like, okay, I really want to learn this stuff. And small, busy small business owners, or small, business owners that are just super busy, like this is something that is a concern. I'm sure that's you probably learned that, or you probably heard that. I'm sure
Yeah.
that's why this
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
here. So just what's to expect. Like there's almost like really no questions almost, right? And if there is, there's an FAQ at the bottom, which is again really well thought out. Yeah, this is great. I'm really curious though, Liz. Like some folks out here, yes, they are thinking, they love the idea of like digital products. You mentioned that this is going to be probably the fourth. This is the fourth version or the fourth time you're teaching this, or fifth time this year. Is that right?
In the fifth coming up in
The fifth time
September.
coming
Yeah,
up. Yeah,
I tend to launch it sort of once a year. So yeah.
once a year. So what I'm curious about is like, what did the first version of this look like? Just so that people are watching this, are like, no, I can't make something look as beautiful as this for my first one. But like, curious what the first version looked like for you of this course.
Yeah, I mean, the sales page looked very different. And also, I was hosted on a different platform. So it has definitely had a few iterations over the next few months. So I think for like, yeah, 2.5 years, the content mostly stayed the same from the first version. But I'm about to sort of give it a big overhaul, partly because just the tech is updating so
Right.
fast. So even things like Adobe Illustrator, like the amount of updates that they've
Like the
put
AI
in.
and everything, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so I think like now everything just needs a bit of a refresh. So that's my sort of project for the summer, and then it'll be ready to launch again in September. And one thing I am considering, so at the moment I only ever launch it occasionally, like once a year. Occasionally I've done it twice a year, but mainly because it does take quite a lot of my time when because I want to be there and helping all the students, and I keep the numbers sort of limited so that I can do that. But I think what I'm going to do is offer two versions. So one which is basically like a self-paced, I'm not really involved, but there will be like a group that you can come and ask me questions if you need to, but there won't be sort of like regular calls and everything. And then one which is the sort of like I'll be there every step of the way helping you through, because I think people just sort of have different learning needs, and some people just want it right now and they just want to get on with it and they're really motivated, and then other people need a bit more of a guiding hand or need that accountability. So yeah, I'm kind of thinking of different ways of how I'm going to offer it in the future.
That's really awesome. That's really good. Yeah, no, thanks for saying that. Yeah, I guess, yeah, it's really, so the packaging has changed over the years, and the landing page and everything, but really the content has stayed the same, which is great. And yeah, it's always good though. Like, I think it's good when tech changes, or like you're in an industry or a niche where there are changes, because that gives you, a reason to update the content, and, maybe folks to come back and learn maybe a sort of like a higher version, or like a more advanced version of your content and stuff like that. This is awesome, Liz. So again, to recap, we have, or you have, not we. I'm like, okay, well, I'm part of your business now. No, we. So you have your coaching, or sorry, your sort of services business, and then you also have courses, and so do the students tend to become service clients, or is that sort of two separate buckets, or segments?
It's mostly two separate segments. So it's just people at slightly different points of their business journey. Like, they're quite similar, but yeah, just slightly different points of their business journey. Interestingly, a couple of the students have become clients. So usually it's where they've sort of done the course and they've learned quite a lot, but actually I think it makes them realize that they just want someone to do it for them. And
Right.
so then they come back to me and they're like, actually, can you just do it for me? And actually that's been really nice. Like, I've given them a bit of a discount because I've done the course, and then I've got to work on their branding. But what's great about that is that they're coming into it with so much knowledge about the process, because basically the course sort of works you through the process of branding. And so they've actually done a lot of thinking about their business, and so they've kind of done a lot of the groundwork, which makes my life a lot easier than when it comes to me designing it for them. So yeah, it occasionally happens.
Occasionally, yeah. Okay, cool, cool. That's good to know too, because a lot of folks out there like feel like, oh, maybe the people that, yeah, can't do the thing that I'm teaching them will ask me to do it for them as a service, and yeah, that's the honest truth. Sometimes they don't. They're just two separate segments.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. All right. As we wrap up, Liz, I really want to learn. Like, you have a podcast. You're on the Adobe Live channel, I believe, every now and then as well. And so, when did that become a thing for you? Like, when did the content creator hat? When did you put that on? Was that always a thing? Were you always creating content as early day of your business, or is that sort of more recent, or how did that come about?
I have been creating content for a really long time. So, like before I had my business as it is now, I had a blog and I was creating content on Instagram. Like I would be absolutely horrified if I went back and actually looked at it. So I don't think, like I've grown a lot over the last 10 years in terms of content creation. I think, I probably wouldn't refer to myself as a content creator, although I definitely am. But with a podcast, I guess you are, aren't you? Yeah, I am a content creator. But I think like that's very much come about over the last sort of few years. So since working with Adobe, since starting my podcast, and actually what I've realized is that I just genuinely do really enjoy creating content, and I think that's how I've been able to sort of maintain it and keep it up and be fairly consistent with it. So I like the Adobe Live thing came about because someone recommended me, and I used to have like a weekly show where I would live stream and show people how they can use Adobe Express, and that was really fun. And all of these different experiences I think have really, like especially the podcast, have really like built up my confidence, and showing up online, and how I sort of market myself and how I share what I do. It all sort of feeds into each other, because like having to talk about what I do regularly really then helps when I'm actually doing it. And it also helps people like understand, and like, it's helpful for my clients as well. So I feel like all the sort of different parts of my business kind of help the other parts, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. You're the podcast. I'm curious then. So like, are the folks that you're interviewing are folks in your space? What is the I guess, where does the podcast, or where does the content sort of like fall into, lack of a better term, like your sales funnel? Is it more top of funnel? Is it more like awareness, just like, hey, I'm here, this is my sort of, I'm a thought leader in the space. Without answering the question for you, like curious where that falls into, what's the intention behind the content that you create?
I think ultimately it's like top of funnel to get people into my world, to potentially work with me, to potentially take a course. That is the ultimate goal. I don't know if you find this with podcasting, but one of the things that I find hard is to actually, I guess, like quantify how much that happens, because often the podcast is sort of one part of their journey into potentially coming to work with me, and it's not necessarily the part that they say. So I think it's definitely helped bring clients my way, but it's very hard to measure that, because it's not usually the only thing that brings clients my way. It's part of like an ecosystem of content, I think, that helps people get to know me. I think ultimately the podcast helps my target audience, and I think so then when they get to a point where they're thinking about branding, I'm often sort of top of mind, because they've been like listening to my podcast. And in terms of like the guests, it's actually a real mix, because I've come up with a niche that is broad enough that I can talk about all sorts of different topics. So it always comes back to branding and marketing, but there's just so much that you can talk about within that. And one of the things that I love to do is, like, I didn't train as a marketeer, so that is not my profession, but I love marketing. And so I basically use it as an opportunity to ask all the questions that I want to ask from people, like who have really niche expertise. So like, I want to know all about marketing on TikTok or on LinkedIn, and I'll get someone in to talk about that really sort of like specific like marketing niche, and basically I learn loads in the process as well, which is amazing. And it's a great way of just expanding my personal network. Like that was something that I didn't really consider when I started the podcast, but I've interviewed like well over 100 people now, and built up relationships with those guests, and a lot of them are in my industry and in my sphere, and like that has led to like amazing opportunities as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I mean that's kind of same for me, Liz. It's just I just want to interview folks that I can learn from, and also at the same time, networking. You're right though. Like I don't think, if folks are starting a podcast to generate business, it's probably going to be a really long haul, a little bit disappointing, because it's not going to be that unless, you really, figure out the format and everything. But I think it is more of those sort of like periphery sort of like benefits of podcasting and creating content. I mean, YouTube is probably where you would want to be if you want to generate leads quicker, if that's your aim. But I love the podcast because we get to do things like this and connect with folks and like you said, expand your network, so no, that's beautiful. I love the podcast. I think it's great. I love that thumbnail. I think it's awesome.
Thanks.
You've done such a great job there, and I saw that you had a YouTube channel, your YouTube channel as well, and you're sharing it on there as well.
Do. I'm struggling with the YouTube channel. I've shared a few episodes on there, and I'm trying to create content for there. I think what's interesting is I've really found my rhythm and my flow with a podcast, so it's now easy for me to sort of create that content consistently, partly because I have help doing it. I have not found my flow with YouTube yet, but I'm determined. That's sort of like I know that's on my radar, and it's something that I would love to work on more. But there's only a few videos on there.
No, that's all good. That's all good. No, that's really good. But and then you're on Instagram, of course, and I see all your stories there all the time. That's awesome. And you're super busy. And you said that you have a VA, or you have some folks working with you, but primarily it's you, right? It's you running the business.
Yeah. Which is why I'm sort of muddling through all these different things that I want to do. No. But
I think you're doing great. I think it's awesome to see what you're doing. This is great. And again, just going back to the business side of things, because I think we see all the creative stuff, all the things that we all, create, and the things that you're creating in terms of content and all the beautiful things. But it's really cool to hear your business, behind the scenes. And I feel it's really intentional that you have sort of like, you have your coaching, you have your services, and then you have your digital products, and then you have your podcast, and then also, of course, we failed to mention, you have an awesome partner in this, right? Like you have Adobe as a partner. I mean, couldn't get any bigger than that. So So the partner, I mean, that's been amazing. Is really smart.
Yeah. And also, well, a nice little sort of side story to end on. The reason I ended up working with Adobe actually kind of roundabout came about because of my podcast, because I actually posted I posted a story a couple of years ago saying that I was looking for a sponsor, and I didn't know this, but someone from the marketing team in the UK at Adobe was following me and sent me a DM. So this is just from his personal account, sent me a DM being like, oh yes, send me over the information. And I was like, what? No way. And then that's kind of how it all started. And he recommended me to be an ambassador, and that's taken me to LA and speaking at Adobe Max. All these other things have come off the back of that one story where I was just like, hey, I'm looking for a sponsor for my podcast. And it's been amazing.
I love that. I love how we downplayed the podcast and then end off saying it was the podcast, to get one of the biggest brands in the world to partner with you and fly you all over the world. So, Liz, this is so awesome. I know we went over a lot of your sites and everything, but where can people reach you if they want to just connect with you, learn from you, maybe even work with you or take some of your content, what's the best place for that?
So the best places are definitely Instagram. So I'm at Liz M Mosley on Instagram, and that's where I spend a lot of my time. But if you want to learn from me, the podcast is definitely the best place to go. And yeah, you can find my contact form on my website if you want to get in touch with me. I love hearing from people. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Liz, thank you so much for your time. It's been awesome. And I'm sure we'll have you back on very soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to this episode of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments or send me a DM on Instagram or LinkedIn. Also, if you're watching this on YouTube, then check out some of the other videos here and some of the other interviews that we have had on the podcast. If you're listening to this on the podcast, then feel free to join us over on YouTube. There should be a link in the show notes so you can watch the video versions of these conversations as well. Again, thank you for listening and hanging out with me here, as well as Liz Mosley. Again, Rob Balasabas here from the Coffee with Creators podcast, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.